Hi everybody and welcome back to another Tonai Talk. Today we are going to be talking about busting the myths around autism, and we're really fortunate to have Catherine Bailey join us, who is a senior educational psychologist working with neurodiverse children and young people. Catherine's going to answer some common misconceptions or questions we hear about autism when we're working with families and children and young people, which is going to be really important and really interesting for us to hear. As always, guys, you can scan this QR code to gain access to our live sessions, as this is going to form part of a series where we're going to look at myth-busting other kind of areas or topics within the kind of neurodiverse spectrum, and you can do this via the live sessions. But there's also going to be our kind of more traditional Tonai talks if you're interested in those. But like I said, Catherine's joined us for this series, and we're really lucky, and today we're just going to be answering some questions and some common misconceptions about autism. Which brings me on to my first question: do autistic people lack empathy?
Okay, thanks for the question, Caitlin. I just want to sort of start off by saying that an autism spectrum diagnosis, or when you or your child has been identified with a profile of strength or need related to social communication, can trigger tough questions and difficult emotions. And as we know, misinformation spreads very quickly, especially in the age of social media, whether you're an autistic person, parenting an autistic child, or both. So separating the fact from the fiction can make a world of difference to your experience. So in this session, we're going to be looking at some of the myths around autism, and hopefully separating fact from fiction. So in answer to the question, do autistic people lack empathy? Autistic people do not lack empathy. People with different experiences of the world will have difficulty understanding and empathizing with each other. This is exacerbated through differences in language and comprehension, and is called the double empathy problem. It's often used to describe the communication breakdowns that can occur between autistic and non-autistic people. The theory challenges the idea that social shortcomings of people with autism are the reasons that interactions fail. Instead, it proposes that the problem is mutual and that both parties have difficulties understanding. So to bring this alive, for example, autistic people might struggle to read between the lines of what non-autistic people are saying, whilst non-autistic people may make incorrect assumptions about autistic people because they are reading between the lines too much. So there is a breakdown in reciprocity and mutual understanding that can happen when people experience the world differently. Another example of this, if someone has ever experienced a conversation with someone who does not share a first language with, or even an interest in the topic of conversation, one may experience something similar.
That's really interesting, Catherine. So what we're saying is that it's not necessarily that they are lacking empathy, autistic people. It's actually a miscommunication. It's a misunderstanding between us when we have those interactions between neurotypicals and neurodiverse individuals. That's fantastic. So our next kind of question is ASD mostly diagnosed in boys?
Thanks, Caitlin. Actually, no, even though we might think it's mostly diagnosed in boys. There's a number of reasons why this is the case. Historically, research on autistic people was conducted on young boys. Many of the research studies were conducted on male participants. Therefore, there was a limited sample informing what we know today. We're now realising that autistic people, and non-autistic people come to that, are incredibly varied in their presentation. We say that autism is heterogeneous, that is, that one person differs from another. So by relying on one particular understanding of autism, i.e. that which has historically been observed in young male participants, this has led to one particular understanding of autism, which inevitably has led to underdiagnosis of other groups and cultures, such as women, Black communities. Thankfully, the position in research is changing, and there is more and more research studying different groups. Interestingly, in the West Glam Integrated Services for Adults, there are currently 478 people awaiting assessment in Equal Talbot, 315 are female and only 161 are male.
That's really interesting, Catherine, to see that there's this difference, and because our understanding is based mostly on kind of the male presentation and how that's impacting, you know, our girls, you know, as we look at kind of moving forward with diagnosis and assessment. That brings me on to my next question, which is, you know, some people have mentioned, can you grow out of ASD?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, Caitlin. But no, the answer is no. ASD is a neurodevelopmental difference which is present from birth. There may well be differences in how people present across their lifespans. For example, older autistic people may have developed effective coping strategies and therefore externally look less ASD. Another issue is masking, which is the suppression of aspects of an autistic person's identity. Autistic people may mask to avoid social stigma and to try to fit in more. Traits will be suppressed to avoid the negative perceptions of others towards them. However, being less visibly autistic can have a negative effect on a person's well-being and mental health, and takes away all the strengths and differences and understanding the word that can enrich the workplace, school, and other organisations, not forgetting the lives of non-autistic people.
So something I wanted to pick up on there is you mentioned about strengths, and I know that when people talk about kind of autism, they talk about these kind of special abilities or kind of superpowers. And so I was wondering, do all autistic people have special abilities?
Yeah, that's a good question, Caitlin. You may remember a film, Rain Man, which was a film about an autistic man. And in Rain Man, the main character had a number of special abilities. But this really is an outdated stereotype that all autistic people are geniuses, and it can be incorrect and unhelpful. Lots of autistic people have intense special interests and may have a lot of knowledge about a favourite subject, but that's not the same as having a superpower.
Right, okay, that makes sense. So another thing, misconception, I suppose, around autism is that one of these superpowers is being a maths genius. So are all autistic people maths geniuses?
Well, this is just not true, Caitlin. Every autistic person is different and has different abilities and interests. Not every autistic person will be a maths genius. While some may very well have excellent number skills, others may have strengths in other areas such as art, music, science, or sports.
Oh, okay, that's really interesting. So are we all a little bit autistic? I know this is something that people talk about, especially considering, you know, when we talk about words like spectrum and where we might be on it.
Yeah, there's a lot of debate, isn't it? People make throwaway comments around being, you know, being a little bit ASD and on the spectrum. But there's not a yes or no answer to the question, are we all a little bit ASD? We all have a range of characteristics which are human in nature and may or may not be also observed in a profile we associate with autism. Diagnoses of autism or ASD are based on how we externally present to others. The other issue is that by associating some of our human characteristics with ASD, we may be unintentionally minimising the support, the struggles and the understanding of those who are actually diagnosed with an autistic spectrum condition.
Oh, okay. So we talked a little bit about that spectrum, and with the nature of the spectrum, there's this idea of this kind of line, isn't it? There's this linear kind of model which can be seen on the screen. So is this actually true? Is this how the spectrum we speak of, you know, when we talk about autism, is that how it works?
Yeah, okay, so describing autistic spectrum as being on a spectrum or a straight line is misleading. As we've already stated, autism spectrum is heterogeneous, meaning that every individual differs in their presentation. Historically, the word spectrum was meant to capture this variation. Over time, the concept of a spectrum narrowed down even further our understanding of autistic spectrum. For example, we talked about high functioning to low functioning, or less support needs to more support needs. Labels on functioning are generally pretty problematic and can be viewed as offensive. They are not very specific and can be unhelpful. Basing judgment on support needs alone is also not very helpful. So it's better to think of every individual with a spiky profile of strengths and needs. This can provide meaningful support by looking at the constellation of characteristics rather than seeing autistic spectrum on a straight line.
Okay. I think that's really helpful for people's understanding, isn't it? Because we're so used to this kind of linear model, that you talked about, when actually that variable wheel is a lot more representative of autistic people and their kind of the strengths that they demonstrate.
Absolutely.
So a bit of a kind of controversial question next. And it is something that does come up quite often in conversations around neurodiversity, particularly in relation to autism. So do childhood vaccines actually cause autism?
Okay, so this is a myth that many people have heard of before. In 1998, a researcher named Andrew Wakefield claimed that the MMR vaccine caused autism, and his findings were published in the 1998 issue of The Lancet, which is a prestigious medical journal, and from there the story spread. Meanwhile, despite researchers' efforts, nobody ever managed to replicate Wakefield's findings. Investigators discovered that Wakefield had a financial conflict of interest and was also ideologically opposed to vaccinations. So in 2010, a panel charged Wakefield with this dishonesty in his research. The article in The Lancet was retracted and he lost his medical licence, as there was no scientific support for the idea that vaccines cause autism. Of course, many people still do believe that vaccines cause autism, and it's one of the many reasons that vaccine hesitancy is on the rise.
Right. Okay. You can see where that may have come from. If there's been this article released that that made such a big statement about this link between vaccines and autism, but there has been no scientific kind of support for this.
That's right.
Okay, and this brings me to one of our final questions. Is autism a result of bad parenting, which some people have suggested in conversation?
Yeah, we hear this a lot, don't we? When we're having conversations with parents, whether they're concerns around social communication or possible autism spectrum, parents often look to themselves and blame themselves, something that they feel they may have done which has caused the autism. And I think it's important to sort of go back to the history of why people might attribute autism to bad parenting. If we go back in time to the 1940s, when the concept of autism first emerged, Austrian psychiatrist Leo Kanner was the very first person to describe autism. And what he theorised was that autism was caused by something called refrigerator mother syndrome. At this point in the study of psychology, researchers inspired by Sigmund Freud thought that childhood trauma was the root cause of mental issues. In the case of autism, the phrase refrigerator mother says it all. The theory suggested that cold, distant and unavailable mothers traumatized their children to such an extent that they became autistic. And for decades, this theory dominated the study of autism. But there's never been any scientific evidence behind this theory. Researchers have looked at this carefully, and it's proven to be false. Parenting styles do not cause autism. Different methods of parenting will inevitably impact on a child's presentation. However, differing styles do not cause autism.
I think that's a really important point, Kath, and like you said, it's a concern that parents bring to us when we are discussing social communication needs. And there can be that tendency to blame themselves when there's actually no reason to. There's no scientific evidence to suggest parenting has any causal effect on the development of autism. And so I think this is something really important for parents to remember and to take away from today. So hopefully we have debunked some of the common myths around autism in this session. However, if you have any further questions, please refer to trusted sources for further information. These can be found online, and we'll put the link to some of these resources below. We just want to say, myself and Catherine, a huge diolch yn fawr. Thank you so much for joining us today for our Tonnau Talks on busting the myths around autism. As I said when introducing this topic, you can scan the QR code to gain access to our other live sessions, and to kind of follow us. Please look at our YouTube channel, because we will be posting some more of these myth-busting talks regarding neurodiversity. But thank you so much, everybody, and we hope to see you soon.
Thanks, Caitlin. Thanks, everyone. See you soon.